What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Discovering Bob Dylan, podcast for both Dylan lovers and haters equally, I think. As always, I'm Joe. I'm the hater of Bob Dylan, though I'm learning to love him. I can say the L word now. And of course, with me, Dylan Sevey, the big fan, the lover of Dylan, the teacher of Dylan, my mentor and guru here on Discovering Bob Dylan. At least he has been until maybe today. I'm not 100% sure. He'll fill us in a little bit. But today is the day we are talking about Bob Dylan's, I don't even know how to describe it. It's self-portrait. We're talking about self-portrait. The adjectives, the verbs, they're not coming to mind, but it is a unique output. So uh, so far anyway in his catalog, we're not all the way through. We're still, just got out of the 60s. We're here in 1970. It's a new decade, a new Dylan. And once again, he's just confusing the crap out of everybody. Uh, with apologies to Greil Marcus, Dylan, can you tell me what is this shit?
Oh, Joe. Well, I think, for better or worse, in a discography filled with so many fascinating albums, it's one of his most fascinating. Over the last couple of records, we've seen him in a few different ways, kind of balking at his own legacy that he built up to that point. Neither John Wesley Harding nor Nashville Skyline were brimming with the electric guitar and organ-based soundscapes that made up the famous Electric Trilogy. Neither of them featured these extremely psychedelic lyrics. Both of them are very stripped down, no frills. They sound like they were made by a guy who was just trying to chill out. Not that he's not taking the material seriously, but he's not striving for the same things on those records that he was on the ones before them. Um, and he's not going out on tour. He's hardly doing any press. He's just following the muse and hanging out with his wife and kids. And yet, the public still isn't satisfied. So he, in his own words, loads a bunch of crap onto a double album, calls it Self Portrait, referencing the album cover that he painted, as well as making a tongue in cheek commentary about the music. And we've got an album that is still confounding people today. You have referenced the famous Greil Marcus quote. That's how he started his Rolling Stone review of this when it came out in 1970. He just says, "What is this shit?" I think you can argue it's a lot of things: a mess, a missed opportunity, misunderstood. I could argue with all of these, or I could agree with all these to some degree. Like I said in the last episode, despite there being some things we haven't heard before and some really batshit crazy stuff, at its core, it's still rooted in the genres that Bob has mostly been known for, rock, blues, folk, country, so on and so forth. Some of it was recorded very soon after Nashville Skyline, where he's still got that smooth country croon. Some of it's recorded in early 1970, where he's got a bit of husk back in his voice. Um, and uh, and that's we're entering possibly my favorite era of his singing voice with that. And with all those elements together, overall, I think Self Portrait has a handful of excellent songs, a handful of extremely lousy songs, and everything in between. A lot of it for me floats around the "this is fine" hemisphere, but simply put, it's inconsistent. Back in 2013, he released the Bootleg Series Volume 10 titled Another Self Portrait, which covered a lot of the sessions. And you can hear some of the songs that ended up on the album without all the overdubs. And you can really hear kind of a clearer picture of him. Similarly, I think, to the debut record, as a passionate performer and interpreter without kind of the antagonistic conceptuality that the final album took on. It's a really fantastic set. It's one of my favorite installments of the Bootleg series, especially because of how much I love his voice from this era. I do think, though, that to some extent in recent years, and maybe because of that bootleg series, there's been a bit of an overcorrection by some critics and fans as it pertains to the final release of Self Portrait. I've seen and heard some people deem it to be a top 15 Dylan album for them, which seems like a big stretch to me. I don't think that alternate versions and outtakes, no matter how stellar some of them are, change what actually made the record. I don't think that any retrospective context concerning its release changes the quality of the music. I've got more thoughts on the matter. I've got a lot of thoughts on some of the individual songs. But give it to me straight. What does Joe Staggerwald think after his first couple listens of Self Portrait by Bob Dylan? Joe, what is this shit?
Well, it's not. Okay, I'll say this. It's not Two Virgins. It's not Metal Machine music. I think we can be perfectly honest. It's just kind of a weird record that just shows Bob just not caring, I think, about his legacy, just doing whatever he wants to do. And in some ways, that's refreshing, even for me as a listener, because as much as I would like to give like a truly withering critique of Bob Dylan and knock him down a couple pegs and say, finally, here's what I've been waiting for, to really take it to him. I don't have any, hatred for this album. I think it's an interesting album. I think it's might be more interesting for what it says about Dylan and what he was going through and his sort of state of mind than the actual music. I think there's some, plenty of decent songs here, but there's no weight of expectations for him. And listening to it, there's really no weight of those expectations aren't there for me either. Like I don't feel like I'm letting people down by not getting this one, which I kind of started to feel when John Wesley Harding came around and people were teeing off on me in the comments for not getting it. And I think it sort of continues, Dylan's antagonistic mindset. He made the stripped down album full of biblical parables. John Wesley Harding, completely what people didn't expect after Blonde on Blonde. He goes and then he makes a country album after that. So he's done all these things that sort of, is throwing off the shackles, the weight of the world, the weight of the folkies first, and then the critics and everybody else. And he's just doing what he wants to do. And it's a loose, easy breezy double album full of just weird ass stuff. But
We're going with Easy Breezy. That's what we're
I mean, it to me it feels like he's just like, you know what, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do some traditional, I'm gonna do some blues, I'm gonna do some standards. I want to sing like Elvis, so I'm gonna sing like Elvis a couple times. Like it just feels like he's just doing whatever he wants. He doesn't care about, the final output that much. I'm sure, there's, I mean, there's overdubs, and I'm sure he was, messing with the track list and trying to get a good product out there. I don't think it's like a complete throwaway, but it just feels like an artist just kind of doing whatever the hell he wants for once. And it's a little refreshing. I think there's some interesting stuff on here. All the Tired Horses is literally the perfect opener. As terrible as it is in some ways, like it just totally disarms the listener when you're going through this. Okay, there's no Bob Dylan here. Is he even on piano? Is he on guitar, bass? He's not singing. So the footprint of Bob Dylan, not even there. It's just all the tired horses in the sun. How am I get my riding done? Over and over. It's a decent song underneath. There's some cool organ and stuff, and the backing vocalists are lovely. It could have been a real song, but it's not. And it's really disconcerting the way it kicks off the album because you're like, what? I mean, as Greil Marcus said, what is this shit? But
and I'm sorry to interrupt you.
no, no,
I
no.
just I need a look into your work when you put this on for the first, because I'm sure you've known about Self-Portrait forever, and then over the last few months gearing up, you've heard and read a few more things along the way. Maybe you have some expectation in your head of what this album is. Take me into the room with you when you're listening to this for the first time.
All right, so I'm throwing the headphones on, bringing it up. I'm listening to it on Spotify. Put it on. So I mean, there's no mistake. I didn't think I was listening to something else. I knew this was Bob Dylan and this is self-portrait. I put it on. And I'm like, all right, okay, that's a decent refrain. I'm just gonna wait for Bob to start singing here. And it keeps going. I'm like, all right, something's gotta happen here. And you're just waiting. You're waiting on Bob, and Bob never shows up. And it's just a very odd experience when you're listening to a Bob Dylan album, you know, and he doesn't show up. There's no Bob here. And I think it just immediately sort of throws you in a tailspin, kicks you into a weird loop. And after that, I don't, maybe it's just like after that, everything's going to sound good. So maybe that's the reason he had it first. But I think it's a very calculated move to put that song at the beginning. But it's just this odd journey from All the Tired Horses to Wigwam and then Alberta number two. But yeah, you think he's gonna just start singing at any moment because it feels like a real fully fleshed out song that's just like Bob didn't show up that day or something. Like I don't, is there like a deeper story behind it or just that's just how it went?
So, I mean, I genuinely enjoy All the Tired Horses, and maybe it's some fan glasses on, but from a strictly musical standpoint, I agree. I think it's got a really interesting orchestral build. It sounds very cinematic. I can understand anyone not liking it. I know quite a few people who don't like it. I think very few people put on a Bob Dylan record expecting to hear a choir of female singers repeating the same line over and over. But going back, him using this record as the ultimate fuck you statement to people who are still trying to prop him up on this pedestal, I can't help but admire this master stroke of alienation. Because not only does it achieve that for most people who listen to it, it's still conceptually on brand. This guy is feeling lost, pissed off, disillusioned. Fuck everybody. Look at all the tired horses in the sun. How am I supposed to get any writing or writing done? I think that's the commonly accepted double meaning there. I think it's awesome. I mean, the intention behind it is basically, hey, let me make something that people are gonna hate, and I think he succeeds with it. And strangely, that's it's not the whole reason I love it. I legitimately like All the Tired Horses, but I can't say that I don't admire it conceptually as well.
I mean, it's almost like a test.
Hmm.
You keep going. The true fans are going to keep going through. So he's just separating the wheat from the chaff here. The Dylan believers are going to go right through. They're not even gonna have a second thought about Bob Dylan not showing up for the first song on his album. Going to go right on through to Alberta number one, which is a fine country tune. I guess we could talk about more songs than just All the Tired Horses. I'll go through. There's a couple decent ones here that I liked. It's an interesting mix, and you never really know what to expect. Because some songs he's doing the crooner Nashville voice. Some songs he's just sort of traditional Bob Dylan voice. Then you have the live tracks, which again, it's just this weird mishmash.
It's a weird self-portrait.
It is. Yeah. It's like in crayon or something. But I mean, there's some good songs on here. I like his originals, like Living the Blues. I think it's pretty good. I like his take on Early Morning Rain from Gordon Lightfoot. Don't love the In Search of Little Sadie and then Little Sadie being like three tracks away from each other. It's an odd choice. A live rendition of Like a Rolling Stone to close out side two. which I'm not a big fan of this rendition. I do not like the way he's stringing those words together. It sounds just off. It sounds awkward. And it's a weird, I mean, I guess it's not weird because it is another. It's like here's the hallowed song, and here's kind of what I'm doing to it. I'm not doing it right, that's for sure. I'm just gonna kind of mess it around a little bit, and you're gonna take it because you're listening to Bob Dylan, bought my album. And what else we got? Blue Moon, I think is fine. Gotta Travel On, one of my favorite renditions on here. The Boxer, I don't mind. I read even, all the songs, the Bob Dylan book, who they rarely have a negative thing to say about a Bob Dylan song. And even the whole album, they're sort of a little too high on, but they didn't like the rendition of The Boxer. I thought it was decent. I don't hate it. Mighty Quinn, you got the live version of that, which is not great, but not terrible. Wigwam, I really do not like at all. I can't believe that was a single. That one actually annoys me a little bit more than all the tired horses. It feels like something that really is missing something. All the tired horses feels deliberate. This feels like it's really missing like some kind of vocal in any way. The la la laws and stuff. Like I expect more from a single. I don't know, maybe I'm missing the point of Wigwam, but that kind of bugged me because I don't think I'd ever heard it before. So I was like, okay, at least there's one single on here and a top 41 hit. It's got to be pretty good. I'm waiting for Wigwam all the way through side four, and then I get nothing. I get another joke from good old Bob there. Some missteps here, certainly. Some odd live versions that don't really need to be on here. The Minstrel Boy, She Belongs to Me, doesn't add to their legacy at all as far as songs go. But I like a lot of the renditions of the classic, the Bordello Bryant stuff, and Gotta Travel On is pretty good. Let It Be Me, really like that. Kickoff side two. I mean, there's certainly a good single album here to be had. I don't know if it's, a four-star album, even if you cut it down. But certainly some worthwhile renditions of classic and traditional tunes. I think everything's played really well. I mean, he still has a really hot band with him. It's still Pete Drake on steel guitar, and I mean, there's a million people, but Buttree's on drums, and you got Al Cooper on a bunch of stuff, and Charlie Daniels on a bunch of stuff, and it's certainly not lacking for talent. The production, Bob Johnson again, perfectly good. The singing is good. It's just an odd choice of songs, and it certainly seems to be deliberate. So I kind of admire him for that. And as much as I wish I hated it, I can say I didn't mind it. It's certainly not going to be one I throw on a lot. But we're looking at a high 3 stars probably. It's a little too long for like a 3.5, but there's some decent stuff on here.
I gotta say, when I texted you the other day and said, "Have you gotten to self-portrait?" and you said, "Started, didn't finish," I was like, "Ooh, oh, oh boy, what are we in for?" Wow, I am. I was
One
gonna
last
say,
thing, sorry, before I let you speak, when I texted that, I did turn it after I heard all the tired horses in the sun. I just kind of got up and walked away. I had to, collect myself a little bit, come back to it. But I had to get my mind right, get into Dylan the agitator, the anti-disestablishmentarianism. Whatever he's doing, like you always say, he has a reason for everything. And I think this is a carefully crafted what he was trying to achieve kind of album.
one of Bob's more beloved tunes in recent years, a song off of Rough and Rowdy Ways, is called "I Contain Multitudes," and I think that you see that. I mean, this album being called Self-Portrait, he named it that kind of as a joke, but I see it. I 100. I mean, you've got the live stuff. I mean, these really, I think, very poor versions of "Like a Rolling Stone" and "She Belongs to Me." Two of my favorite Dylan songs. Very poor versions of them from an otherwise very good. That's from the Isle of Wight Festival, 1969. He's backed by the band with John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr all in attendance there. Um, and some great stuff in the Another Self-Portrait box set. The entire Isle of Wight set is on there. And of course, he picks like the two worst songs from it and puts it on here. You've got, like you said, the crooner, the Nashville skyline voice. You've got the kind of grizzled, folky voice. I love that you pointed out "Gotta Travel On." That's one of my favorites too. You've got some original stuff. You've got instrumentals. You've got everything, and I do think that that is, a very good self-portrait of Bob. Really, the only thing that's missing from this self-portrait is the most defining aspect of his career, which is consistent original songwriting, with most of these being covers. Um, but you hit on a lot of stuff that's very interesting to me. His cover of The Boxer is so fucking ridiculous. I know quite a few people who have said it's their least favorite thing that Bob has ever done. And I get it. I do not like it, but I am amused by it. That may be again the fan glasses. Um, that leads it to not being my least favorite. My least favorite on this record, and actually, I think another aspect of the whole self-portrait, just the fact that he has, like you said, Alberta number one and Alberta number two, and In Search of Little Sadie and Little Sadie. He is known for taking these songs, whether they're his songs or other people's songs, reinventing, working through them. My least favorite song on the record is In Search of Little Sadie, where everyone involved, Bob, the instrumentalist, they just sound lost and confused and terrible. And it might be a bottom 10 Dylan recording for me. But with this album containing multitudes, it contains a bottom 10 Dylan song for me and a top 100, genuinely one of my favorite Bob Dylan recordings, a song you didn't mention, his rendition of Copper Kettle. I love, 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 love his beautiful, soulful vocal on that song. I think the backing track is fantastic. The strings add to the emotionalism. I will pound the table for Copper Kettle any day of the week. I can understand anyone feeling almost any way about this record, but I personally don't think there's any denying the greatness of that song. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of Bob's voice from this era. Like I said, especially entering 1970. So that's a solid boost for the listenability factor for me. And I'd say that around 75 to 80% of the arrangements are strong, occasionally overproduced, but strong. I have my own version of Self-Portrait, my little playlist, which consists of probably like 12 to 14 songs from this, and then my favorite stuff from the bootleg series. Taking on all 24 songs of Self-Portrait at once is an undertaking I'm less likely to do on a regular basis, and have been less likely to do on a regular basis. But that playlist, it definitely includes "Let It Be Me," "Early Morning Rain," like you said. I really like "Wigwam." "Wigwam" is actually one of my favorites on the record. I think it's a really evocative, pseudo instrumental. Wes Anderson agrees because he featured it in the Royal Tenenbaums.
I don't like Wes
Wait,
Anderson either.
of course you don't. That is the most on-brand thing I've ever fucking heard. But yeah, I like the country cuts. "Take Me As I Am," "I Forgot More Than You'll Ever Know," "Take a Message to Mary." Yeah, kind of, halfway in between the Nashville Skyline country sound and definitely a bit of that I hear a bit of that Elvis sound, and like "Take a Message to Mary" and whatnot. And I dig the live cut of "The Mighty Quinn." The "Mighty Quinn" is a really fun song. Yeah, I think there's this version of it, and then the version that was recorded during the Basement Tapes session was then further released. I want to say maybe on Greatest Hits Volume 2 eventually. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I don't think that either are the all-time versions of that song. I don't know if Bob ever fully nailed it, but I do like this version. I also really like Minstrel Boy, which I've come to realize is a bit of a unpopular opinion with certain Dylan fans, but none of them are co-hosting this show, so how about that? Yeah, overall, I think that some fans, like I said, when I consider, I guess, some of this overcorrection, I don't think it's a stretch at all for you to say, like, hey, I think this is a fine 3-star record. Uh, a good friend of ours, Tom Williams, listened to this album for the first time last year and said, I don't understand what the uproar is about this. I hear this as a perfectly fine 3.5-star record. And and I can understand that. And I'm sure as you heard getting into it, it's like, okay, yeah, it's not Metal Machine music. It's not Two Virgins. It's not even Lulu. Um, there's a lot of very accessible stuff here. I think that some fans have a hard time reconciling with the fact that it didn't deserve as much hate as it got at the time, but that it was also, I mean, maybe you don't think this. I think that to me, it's clearly the quote unquote worst thing that he's released up to this point. You know, you might feel a little differently, but I don't know. I don't think that this is akin to like Rolling Stone bashing those first 4 Zeppelin records, or like, McCartney receiving so much backlash for Ram, where it's like you look back on it and you're like, wait, where did this come from? Um, I mean, I think that Self Portrait was a ballsy move. That doesn't necessarily make it a great album. Um, some fans, maybe they genuinely enjoy all of this sprawling, insane record. For me, I recognize it as a flawed project. I'm good with select cuts from it. I'm definitely good with the bootleg series. But like I said, I'm not even trying to downplay it too much, and I'm especially not trying to downplay the fact that you enjoyed it as much as you did, because I do like more than half of it. Blonde on Blonde, it's not.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Dylan probably was crucified for it a little bit more than the average. If someone else had made it, it wouldn't have gotten the backlash. But, at the same time, I always say Dylan probably gets the benefit of the doubt from every critic, because, everybody loves him. So, he disappointed a lot of critics who really loved him and loved everything he did and thought he was just the greatest musician of all time. And now he's finally a human. Like, this is his I'm a human being, damn it, kind of album. I'm not perfect. But it's nothing terrible. It's not one of the worst albums ever made. It's just kind of a throwaway, fun. I don't even know how to really classify it, because I don't know Dylan quite enough to really get into his mind for this. But it just seems like it was, a third or so album in a row where he just wanted to veer left and, not do what was expected of him. And he did it. And it's not too terrible, not nearly as bad as I had read, at least, with the what is this shit, and we're calling it the third worst album of all time, after Metal Machine Music and Having Fun with Elvis on Stage, according to Jimmy Gooderman and Owen O'Donnell. So, no, is it a great album? Certainly not. Is it, a boon to Bob Dylan's legacy? Maybe not, but it doesn't hurt his legacy in any way to have a weird, bunch of covers and traditional songs.
It's not even a bottom 10 Dylan album, in my opinion, which may not bode well for you to hear me say that. But, I just, again, want to take a moment here. let's acknowledge progress here. You've just listened to one of the most maligned albums of all time by an artist that you've historically been a quote unquote hater of, and you're coming away with some positives here.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to the people. Um, I wish, I'm still waiting for that Dylan album to really just tee off on. And I will say, if I was alive in 1970 and I heard this, I would just absolutely rip it to shreds. Like I'm sure of it. I would be just, going down the street with pitchforks and burning, torches, going straight to Dylan's house, calling him a fraud, a phony, calling out all
Well,
the critics. I would have reveled
well,
in it, but I'm
I'm
gonna.
even wondering though. I'm wondering, thinking about one of the main sort of concepts of this show, looking at it truly as a journey. You are now hearing this album after, so this is his 10th album. It's the 11th one we've listened to because we put the basement tapes ahead of John Wesley Harding. And we've had a lot of these discussions. You've been reading through that book, you've been doing your own research. Let's say before this show had even started, before you even had this idea that I want to do this, say we're on the Taste Like Music Discord server, which everyone out there can access if they donate to the Patreon. And somebody plays this in the album of the week sub channel there, and you have to go listen to stuff. And at this point, you're still in the mindset of, yeah, this guy's a couple records I like, but I've got an image to maintain, and I know I'm not as big on these other. What how do you think you've how do you view the relationship between what you think about this album right now versus how you think you would have felt about it at that point?
I mean, I definitely would have taken it to the woodshed, out behind the woodshed, I guess,
Sure.
and really laid into it, and because it comes in such like a perfect time after the '60s, and Dylan's already held up as this, messiah figure in music, and to have something like this and just be able to knock it all down would have been great. I mean, I would have really loved that. But listening to, the albums in sequential order and sort of discovering more about his backstory and all that, it just doesn't feel like this huge disaster swing and a miss kind of thing. It just feels like this is what Bob Dylan was doing at the time. This is what he liked to do. He liked to just mess with people's expectations of what he was about. Yeah, I mean, at one time in my life, I would have been like 1 star. This sucks. This is an embarrassment. Everything I thought about Bob Dylan was true. He stinks. But yeah, I'm a little different now that I've gone on this journey and listened to all the good Bob Dylan stuff. And this, it just feels like a fun record for him. Just doing some stuff he wants to do, some covers of Paul Simon and weird stuff like that, Gordon Lightfoot. It just whatever, man. It's Bob Dylan. The expectations, the weight is lifted. Just gonna mess around.
I mean, I was telling people privately that I was expecting anywhere between 1 and 4 stars from you, and I was about to say when you said 3 stars, oh wow, I'm shocked, but I'm not shocked. I think that's a perfectly reasonable score for this record. A record with "In Search of Little Sadie" and what I think is a really lousy version of "It Hurts Me Too," which is one of my favorite Elmore James songs. There's a few clunkers on here for sure. I mean, I'm amused by the boxer, but the boxer is still probably pretty low in the record. I really can't do those live versions of Rolling Stone and She Belongs to Me. There's definitely a few, it sounds like Woogie Boogie, which is like, what is it? Like literally a 2 minute. It's not bad, but it's about as inconsequential can be. You can only get so high with it. But Early Morning Rain, Gotta Travel On, Copper Kettle. I mean, there is more than enough good stuff here.
All right, so Self-Portrait is it's his worst album so far, but it's a pretty stellar discography throughout the '60s. A 3 star out of 11, 10 albums, 11 albums, whatever. is the low point. Not bad at all. So I think so far, again, I've been pretty pleasantly surprised by even the albums that people think, are bad or barely mentioned, like the debut. This one, even at his worst, I'm loath to admit that I'm enjoying the Bob Dylan experience here. All right, so
I can see the pain. I can feel the teeth gritting. People are going to be
uh,
so disappointed in you.
and now we're getting back into the good stuff, right? New Morning is next.
So I wrote down in my notes, I wrote down good news for Joe because I was expecting a much more negative review from this. I'm really just excited here. At the same time that Bob was recording self-portrait, yes, he was writing material that would eventually come out also in 1970 as an album called New Morning. We can go a little bit more in depth in the next episode as to how and when and why he started writing some of these songs. A lot of people have this misconception that New Morning is his, oh shit, people really didn't like this last record, so I gotta make something more accessible. Like, nah, Bob did not care about that. So I know you've heard at least some of this record before and enjoyed it, if I remember correctly. And I feel pretty confident that we're not that we went majorly off track here, but that we'll get even more back on track.
Yeah, I know a couple songs off here. I may have listened to it all the way through at one point. I can't actually remember, but everyone knows The Man in Me. I mean, it's a fine pop song. And if not for you, again, fine little song. So I expect some good things. He's still got a great band. He really hasn't let me down as far as songwriting goes. It was more the style of something like John Wesley Harding. Really like Nashville Skyline, so I'm interested to see what he's going to do here in the 70s. Self-portrait's not really probably a good example of like a new sound that he's going to go to. So I am interested to see if this album has more of a new sound. I mean, I'm trying to think, okay, what does The Man in Me sound like? It kind of sounds like 70s music a little bit. It's a little more modern. It's not like a country album. I'm thinking it's not a stripped back John Wesley Harding type album. I'm thinking, at least from what I remember. Are you just laughing? Just gonna laugh at me?
No, I mean you're listen, you gotta listen to the album. I mean, I can't tell you what it is. I mean, it's new. It's a new morning. Yeah, it's a new morning on a new decade, and the '70s is a all the decades are fascinating to different degrees, but the fascination of the '70s in some ways lies within the fact that it's the first new decade of Bob Dylan coming out of a decade that he had previously existed. There was no Bob Dylan before the 60s. He hit the scene, he played his role in the counterculture and all that stuff. But now we're entering the 70s. He's an established artist. The last few years of the 60s have been kind of strange for him. And I'm thinking about all the records in my head and how different so many of them are. New Morning definitely has its own sound. I think you hear a little bit of holdover. He's working on a lot of this material, like I said, at the same time that he's doing self-portrait. And we'll eventually talk about the infamous 1973 Dylan release, which is because it's all cover songs, everyone always assumes that it's just all outtakes from self-portrait. But most of them are actually outtakes from the New Morning sessions. He was continuing to do a lot of these covers through the New Morning session. Like I said, that's another reason why this bootleg series, number 10, Another Self-Portrait, is so fascinating because it also includes a lot of stuff from the New Morning sessions. And when you kind of strip everything away, again, he has these antagonistic intentions and concepts and whatnot, but you take that away and you hear the guy just performing these either these songs that he admires that he's covering or these new songs that he's writing that mean something a lot to him. It's it's pretty miraculous, and I'm really excited to talk about New Morning with you. And going into it, I would just say to keep in mind what I've said before about this kind of being the next logical step from a songwriting perspective, going from John Wesley Harding to Nashville Skyline and now here. And I would say to keep in mind that, hey, you made it through Self-Portrait, and that's awesome. So I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, we're playing with
that's
house money here.
that's right. It's got to be better than that. I did give Bob kind of the benefit of the doubt in the '60s. I remember saying in the early episodes, yeah, it doesn't really have that much competition. So, yeah, Bob Dylan's put out some great albums, but and now we're in the '70s. We're with the big boys now. So I'm gonna see if he can keep up with the big stars of the '70s, the CSNYs, the Neil Youngs, the Claptons, the Zeppelins, the Stones, whatever, the big boys. The big boys
Well,
are all, gearing up. I want to see what Bob Dylan sounds like, kind of in relation, and if he's on the, he's still on the cutting edge. Is he kind of reining things back still?
mhm.
I want to hear. I want to hear what Bob Dylan does here.
Well, I think that to some degree, context is important. Thinking about 70s artists, you're a big Led Zeppelin fan, you're a big Steely Dan fan, you're a big Stevie Wonder fan. I'm sure that you love all of those artists for different reasons. The same reason you love Physical Graffiti is not the same reason that you love Asia, and that's not the same reason that you love Sons of Kila. There may be some parallel, aspects to them, but I wouldn't go into New Morning and say, okay, how is this going to compare to Lead 4? That's I don't think that's exactly a fair thing. But I know what you're saying. But I would say listen to it firstly. You can theorize on that and think about that whatever ways you want to later. But I think you've done a very good and admirable job so far at kind of being able to look at it everything in the world of Bob. You are aware listening to Blonde on Blonde, okay, this is 66 and we also got Revolver and we also got Pet Sounds. And that's great, but you just gave like a decent review for a record that came out in the same year as All Things Must Pass. What else came out in '70 here? Lead 3, so on and so forth.
Paranoid. I mean,
Yeah.
late. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
good
So,
album.
spoiler alert: Self-Portrait, maybe not on those levels, but you were able to listen to it for what it was, and I would say listening to New Morning, like listen to it as the next Bob Dylan album. Like I don't think it's necessarily super important. Yeah, and I don't know. Maybe I'm about to be a little hypocritical here. I don't know, but I think it's one thing to acknowledge an artist's importance and their cachet and whatnot, but at a certain point, I think the best way to judge music is to judge it based off how much we like it. And if you like something, and it happens to be Bob Dylan, and it happens to be from the same year that Paranoid and All Things Must Pass were released, like it's okay to like it, even if it's Bob Dylan, and it's not Highway 61 or Freewheeling or anything.
Of course. Yeah, I will try not to compare New Morning to After the Gold Rush, Tumbleweed Connection, Lolo versus Power Man,
You just looked up
Seven Street Chocolate
1970
Factory.
albums and you're
I'm just going down my list. Bridge
yeah.
Over Troubled Water,
Yeah, that one's all right.
Paranoid,
There's a
Black
couple good
Sabbath,
ones.
self-titled. Some good stuff that year. Let It Be. But no, I will listen to it for what it is, and hopefully I will enjoy it. I imagine, well, I don't want to judge. From what I know of it, I like it. I always liked A Man in Me a lot. That was a really good pop song. Even before I started liking Bob Dylan, I really liked that track. So we'll go with that. Positive thoughts for New Morning. We made it through Self-Portrait. That's the important thing. We're keep going. The show is not ending. We're just gonna keep on going. We've decided.
Listen, we're a quarter of a way through the records now. We can't stop.
No, we've gone too far now. So, what do you think of self-portrait? Do you think it's a misunderstood masterpiece? I hope not. God, I hope not. But do you like it for what it is, at least? Or do you legitimately hate it and think it's, the nadir of his entire career? Let us know in the comments. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. And yeah, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time here on the Discovering Bob Dylan podcast.